Call to order this Garrison Board of Education regular meeting of the Garrison Board of Education of October 23rd. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, first order of business up is a presentation on special education, correct? Oh, before we get there, a very important thing. Matthew Spicer will be sworn in as a trustee for the school board. We welcome him. Sure. Okay.
I, Matthew Spicer, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of trustee of the Board of Education of the Garrison Union District.
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of trustee of the Garrison Union Free School District Board. Yeah, Board of Education. All right, working on my memory. Yep.
According to the best of my ability.
According to the best of my abilities.
Very good.
All right. No.
Now's your last chance to back out.
You already signed.
Welcome,
Thank you.
Okay, second thing up is the presentation on special education. We have a number of presentations that occur throughout the year. The board, on occasion, requests the administration to we're trying to seek particular information or perspective on all kinds of matters, academic and otherwise, and this is one of those moments where board interest in the processes and procedures regarding special education. So I'll just turn it over to Lauren.
Sure. I'd just like to introduce Jennifer Muller. She's our CSC chair and expert in the house regarding special education processes, responsibilities, referrals, all of that falls under the umbrella. So welcome and thank you. And we welcome questions along the way.
So, good evening. I guess the purpose of the presentation from Support Services is really to give you a broad overview of special education and what special education looks like in our school district. We'll take you through eligibility and the entire process of eligibility and what that looks like, and talk about how that fits with the regulations that we're required to really hold to in terms of a local school district, New York State, and the federal regulations. So, to begin, it starts with a question. Oftentimes there's a question about how a student is performing, why a student is performing a certain way. That question, we call it a referral. It can come from a parent, it can come from their physician, it could come from a classroom teacher, it could also come from the in-house team called our response to intervention team. And what happens when that question is asked, we begin to start the process of investigating whether or not a student has a disability and whether or not that disability requires special education services. So when we begin that process, we begin with the referral and the question. And it starts with logging that into our system. We do have a system and a database. That database is often recorded to New York State, so they're monitoring and tracking everything we're doing in special education, almost as much as we're monitoring and tracking it. I mean, obviously we want to make sure that we're following the regulations, and they're making sure we are too. So we track that by entering into our system. Once we enter that information in our system, there's a tremendous amount of paperwork that's generated for the parents. So if anyone's ever gotten a packet from the Department of Special Education, they will find it is a pretty hefty looking packet. In that packet are the parent rights. Also in that packet is the statement that your child is suspected of a disability. It tells you what areas we're looking to evaluate in terms of disability, and then it has a sign-off sheet for consent. If the parent does not consent to the evaluation, the school district will most likely, in 99% of the cases, will most likely not go forward with the evaluation. There are certain cases where the school district must go forward with the evaluation if it's really suspected that there's a concern there. That generally doesn't happen, and it certainly hasn't happened in Garrison. So we start in that process. Once the parent signs that consent form and it comes back to the district, the school district has 60 days, 60 calendar days, to evaluate the student on those areas listed on that form. And 60 days sounds like a lot of time, but when you think about it, in the world of school, it's really not a lot of time. You have weekends, depending on the time of year, you could have snow days, you could have holidays, you could have 2-week breaks. So your 60 days are chipped away by things such as performances in the school, school absences, and things like that. So the team is working very quickly to try and get through this process. At the end or before the end of 60 days, the team is required to meet with the family and review the evaluations and determine the student's eligibility. So what happens during that process? Once the parent signs and the team begins the evaluation, there are areas. So the areas that we look at consistently, we of course always include the parent. That's called the social history. We ask the parent to come in, or we talk to the parent on the phone, usually done by the school psychologist. She'll ask about birth history, past school history, anything that's important for us to know in terms of looking at this child as a whole child. We don't look at discrete parts of the child. We don't evaluate for certain pieces of a child. We look at the child as a whole to answer the question. So we generate the information from the parents. We also have either the school psychologist or a classroom teacher, usually a special education teacher, go in and observe the student in their classroom, see exactly what's happening, what are the areas of concern. After that, we begin testing. Generally, it starts with the cognitive evaluation. We look at the student's learning strengths and weaknesses. Then we move on to the academic pieces, reading, writing, and math. We investigate those areas. We also ask for their medical records. And then on top of that, if we feel appropriate, we will add a speech and language evaluation, a fine, or a gross motor evaluation. There are obviously many other evaluations, but we start with all of those to answer the question that started it all in the referral process. Once we start gathering that information, we begin with what the people in the field consider the most appropriate tools. The evaluation kits that we use are generally the gold standard in the practice. So the school psychologist, the special education teacher, speech teacher, all of the professionals have specific evaluation tools that they use for all students across the board when they're referred to special education. If during that process the question is not answered, they may take other tools. They may look at other areas to tease out memory, learning processes such as attention, focus, behavior, any of those areas that might also impact the students along the way. So they'll begin with the standard tests and then add tests along the way. So if you're thinking about it, you can see this can be a pretty lengthy process, and you're going to take the child out of the classroom for 8, 10, 12 hours during the evaluation process. That's why we're very stringent on who we refer to the special education process, because it is a tremendous amount of time for the student to miss class. So once we go through that process and we gather all of that information, we start to bring the parents and the team together to review all the information. Generally what happens is team members will call the parents. They'll either invite them in or they will call them, depending on everyone's schedule, and go over the evaluations in detail with the parent, or as much detail as the parent wants or needs. After that's done, the team, what's called the Committee on Special Education, will ask the parent to come in. There'll be a specified date, and we'll ask the parent to come in for that meeting. So who's at that meeting? That's the Committee on Special Education. Generally, obviously, always the parent. The parent can bring anyone they want to the meeting with advance notice. The parent can also request what we call a parent member. They're not a standing member of the team. That used to be many years ago. They're not standing members anymore, but if the parent would like that, that is a parent who lives or resides in the district and has had a student go through this process with us. So they can be requested to be a support system for the parent. We just need a little bit of notice so that we can get the parent on board. And in all these 5 years, I've only had one request, and it literally just happened. So that was very interesting to actually have the parent members sit with us and have a great rapport with the parent at the table. The next people involved are always the classroom teacher, the special education teacher, preferably the one who has evaluated the student. If it is an initial evaluation, the school psychologist is always there. If the child had a speech and language or an OT or a PT evaluation, we usually have those related service professionals. And the CSE chairperson, that's the person, myself, who oversees all of the information and can look at all of the testing materials and help to determine eligibility. So during the process, we review all of the testing after we hear from the parent any important information that they would like to share about their child to the committee. We go through all the testing and we come up to the point of determining eligibility. It's a very stringent process, and eligibility is not determined by Garrison regulations. It's not determined by just New York State regulations. It begins at the federal level. Once the federal government has set forth their regulations, each state has the opportunity to make it more stringent than what the federal government sets forth. And they're constantly changing some of these regulations. So, lucky for us, New York State happens to be very stringent. So, evaluating a student and getting to the point of eligibility is not very easy in New York State. After that, each school district has the right to interpret from there. So, here in Garrison, we tend to interpret on the side of caution. We like to ensure that our students are meeting their needs from 3 years old all the way up to 21. So when we're sitting down to discuss the eligibility of a student, unlike when a child is in preschool, we cannot just say a child has a disability. When a child is anywhere between 3 and 5 years old, the classification is a preschool child with a disability. That's it. There are criteria that they must meet, but it is based on a formula. Once a student gets to 5 years old, and this becomes very confusing to parents who have had a child at the preschool level, once they turn 5 and are about to come into kindergarten and we're looking at eligibility, everything changes for them. Once you come to the kindergarten process or any period of time after that, eligibility is based on meeting one of the criteria in 13 categories. So, those categories happen to be very stringent. Just off the top of our heads, most of those categories, we don't have students in those categories. So for example, we don't now have a student who's visually impaired. We have in the past. We don't have a student who's orthopedically impaired, who has major motor deficits that can't navigate the building. If we did have a student like that, it would be very difficult for us to provide services for them. We would often seek another placement for them. There are times when we have students who have other overall deficiencies that are intellectual disabilities. We have students who have multiple disabilities. Those are students who have cognitive, linguistic, and motor and emotional disabilities. That's what we call multiply disabled. We have students who have emotional disabilities. Those are students who under normal circumstances don't have what's considered typical behavior. They can't establish relationships with their peers or other trusted adults in the community. The most areas of classification that we see across many of our school districts are other health impaired. That's for students who have medical deficits. They're diagnosed, they may have ADHD, they may have diabetes, they may have some other trauma that happened to them that significantly impacts them in the academic world. There are other students that we have who have speech and language impairments, not articulation deficits, not an inability to speak. That we cannot classify a student once they get to the kindergarten level on. If they have difficulty in terms of intelligibility speaking appropriately, we would generally give them building level services and see what happens from there. To classify a student as speech and language impaired, they would have to have some expressive, how they speak, or receptive, what they understand, language deficits shown on testing. So that's just another big area. And of course, the largest area that we have is learning disability. Again, New York State is very stringent on this. The guidelines for learning disability have changed probably 5 times since I've been a school psychologist. And they're continuing to develop and change to meet the needs of our students. Overall, to have a learning disability, to begin with, you must have at least average intelligence on one of the cognitive evaluations. After that, you should have a deficit in a cognitive process. So a memory problem, a processing problem, some other difficulty that's impacting you in terms of your ability to learn reading, writing, and math. And then on top of that, you must have a significant deficit in an area of reading, writing, and math. It shouldn't be all three. It can impact all three, but there should be one area that has a significant deficit. And certainly the team works to try and tease out what that deficit area is. Once we uncover all of that information, then we start to figure out what that area of deficit and what we need to do for those students. So that's how we determine eligibility. The student has to meet those areas, one of those 13 areas. When we're sitting at the table as a committee, we talk about some of those areas. We talk about the areas that are inappropriate for a student, and then we talk about the ones that we're considering. And we ask the team what everyone thinks. Everyone who's sitting there kind of weighs in on their thoughts. If we all agree that the student meets the criteria for eligibility, we move on to talking about now what does the student need to learn. That's called the goals. As a team, we review what the student needs to know. So for example, we're not looking to advance a student in a grade, we're looking to fill in the gaps. So for a kindergarten student, we wouldn't be talking about reading chapter books. We would be at literally the letter level, the sound level. We would be trying to help them understand sound symbol association. So we're not looking to advance, we're looking to fill in the gaps of learning that are their areas of disability. So once we develop all of those goals, then we talk about where do we meet those goals? What do we do with this student now? Obviously, general education isn't the most appropriate process. What should we do for them? So then we talk about programs and services and supports. So that's the part that brings us to what would be our recommendations. That's where we talk about continuum of services. So before I go on, that's already a lot of information. Should I stop? Any questions?
Probably. I'm guessing there are, and it's a nice sort of moment of pause here. If it's okay with the board, there's a public comment that she would follow, but I think what we'll do, if it's okay with you guys, is maybe take a break during some of this presentation and allow the public to ask a question or two. Is that? I mean, it might slow up our presentation a little bit, but it might help with sort of focusing the conversation. There is to be a conversation. So, any questions on? You talked a little bit about. You said New York State is more stringent. You can strengthen versus the federal guidelines, right? New York regs are stringent. And what do you mean by stringent? Meaning a little bit more. What did you mean by that?
So, in some states, for example, up till you're 8 years old, you can still be presumed just a child with a disability. So that takes away, when children are developing at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, they're developing at very uneven rates. You all have children, obviously. If you have more than one in your home, you might see that your first child might have developed at a different rate than your second child. And oftentimes, those gaps close on their own. And so in some states, they give children up to 8 years old to close that gap through special education in any way possible. They just blanket call them a child with a disability, and that's it. New York State won't allow for that. That's one example of more stringent.
I have a question regarding the 13 points. And you might be getting to this later, but forgive me if you are. Does that include, right now we're using just learning disabilities. Do you break it out to say dyslexia, dysgraphia, I'm just going to mispronounce it, dyscalculia? Like, does that, or is that one of the 13, or is it broken out under a subset? How do you handle that currently?
So all of those, like say for example, dyslexia. Dyslexia means a difficulty in reading. Just by definition, that is housed under learning disability, specific learning disability in the area of reading. So it's still housed under a learning disability.
Okay.
New legislation has come out that we can actually now use those terms. In the past, committees on special education couldn't actually call a child dyslexic. because it's really a diagnosis. We're not allowed to diagnose. So now they're saying, yes, you can actually put that terminology on an IEP. We still can't diagnose it. We can identify it, and we can start to generate goals that attack reading, writing, or math, those specific areas. But there is no, in any state, there is no classification for dyslexia, dysgraphia, any of that.
And
So
when-
it's housed together.
When the process you're talking about, does it only refer to IEPs, or are you also talking about the same process for 504s?
504s are less stringent, and it's a less complicated process. If you want, I could go into it.
No, but I would just, what the process you just went through is specifically for an IEP.
for an
process.
IEP.
Thank you.
Okay. So you mentioned that generally you're working with ages 3 to 21, which is under the law. But do you ever receive referrals for under 3s? And where do the majority of your referrals prior to kindergarten come from?
Great question. So 0 to 2 is early intervention. That is county-based service. So a referral is made from a physician to the county. The parent requests, generally it's usually at birth, usually there's some incident at birth, and the child will receive services maybe in a hospital setting, maybe in some other setting, or maybe providers may come to their house. That's 0 to 2. Once they get to 2 years old, we have what we call like a transition meeting from early intervention to the Committee on Preschool Special Education. And here in this district, I'm covering both of those. In other districts that are much larger, they might have 2 separate people, one covering 5 to 21 special education and one covering 3 to 5. So once the child transitions to 3 years old, at about their point where they're 2 and a half, we have a transition meeting with the county. We ask the parent, do you want to go forward with this referral? The parent either signs yes, establishes residency, because if you don't know about them, they have to establish residency. Once they do, then we, the special education department, sends the similar referral out to the parent with consent. The difference is the parents get a list of agencies to choose from rather than the school district to have the evaluation process start. And then those people come to us and deliver the information. So most of those referrals either come from a preschool. So it shouldn't come directly from the preschool. Actually, the preschool provider should be asking the parent to make the referral. Sometimes the preschool will call me directly, and I'll ask them, have you worked with the parent? I shouldn't be calling the parent and say, hey, your teacher thinks that your child has a disability. That's an uncomfortable position to be in. So we work with the preschools. Really important piece of information. Here in Putnam County, we have a great early intervention program. The people that drive that program actually have meetings for preschool providers multiple times per year so that they can get all of the new state information and learn how to refer students and how to work with parents and how to work with students with disabilities. So that meeting is actually coming up in like 2 weeks.
Where do
So
they have those meetings?
they have them at the county office down on Route 6.
Is it possible to ask them to have a meeting in the town, in Phillipstown, so that?
It's at the county office, yeah. And it's for providers. It's
Right.
for the preschool providers. So the preschools in the area are all invited to attend.
Right, and it happens 8 to 4 or something.
Yeah. So there are times when they do it on a Saturday,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's at their office down on Route 6.
Yeah, I get that. It seems a little counterintuitive. If you have a preschool of, let's say, 12 kids, and you're this old, there's maybe 2 people working, you may not be able to get to that meeting.
Agreed. Absolutely.
That's-
That is true, and that is part of the problem. I have to say that it is the responsibility of the chairperson to go out to the preschools, introduce themselves, and certainly we have done that here. So we're very aware of who the preschools are. When we have a student at the preschool level, I will go out to the preschool, meet the team, meet the student, meet the parent, observe the student. Oftentimes have the parent bring the student here so that sometimes we'll have our OT or our speech pathologist kind of take a look at the student and give us a sense of what kind of evaluations do we need for them and try to help the parent go through the process and establish a rapport and a relationship with them, because it will be a long process if they're staying with us. quite a long time. So you want to establish that early on. So that's a great question.
Any questions? We're ready to move on?
Sure.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so now we're at the point, we've talked about evaluations, we've talked about eligibility, we've talked about how eligibility happens. Now we're at the point of talking about what services do we recommend. We start with the question on the goals. What does this child need to learn? Once we establish what the child needs to learn, then we can talk about where do we deliver that service? How will the child learn that information in what area? So the continuum of services is not driven by Garrison, although Garrison puts their own spin on it. And again, it starts at the top at the federal level, and then it trickles down to the state. And again, New York State is very stringent about how they want their services delivered. So it is very specific when we talk about, when we're sitting at a meeting and we say, this is your service, it is very specific and we have to meet those guidelines. So the continuum of services can start with anything from what we call indirect consultant teacher services. That's where a special education teacher will just meet with the classroom teacher and talk about modifications for the student. Very basic, very simple, almost nothing in terms of service. It can go from there all the way up to a residential program that is approved by New York State. So the students can be removed from their home and live and get their education in another institution. So it really runs a gamut there. So everything in between is really what we do. So next up, from consultant teacher in direct services, where the teacher is just consulting, we have what we call related services. That's our OT, our PT, our speech. Those are students who do not need a program, they do not need a special education teacher, they just need some work on those very specific areas. They may be pulled out of the classroom, the teacher may actually push into the classroom, but they're working very specifically on those goals. So the OT might go in the classroom during a period of writing time and help the student do their writing work. Or they may pull them out and work on some sensory pieces while they're working on their fine motor skills. So it's very specific to the student, specifically designed for that student. So there's no like blanket, this is what we do. We look at each student individually and determine, do we go into the classroom, do we pull them out of the classroom, where do we deliver this service? From related services, we move on to what we call consultant teacher direct. That's where the special education teacher goes into the classroom while the general education teacher is there and works with groups of students. So they're delivering the same instruction, they may be making modifications, they may be helping to chunk material for the teacher. They're also consulting with the teacher on their prep times, but they're delivering those services in the classroom in what we call the least restrictive environment. We want our students to be educated as close to their peers as absolutely possible. So delivering those services in the classroom, we feel, is less disruptive for the entire class, obviously, for the teacher, and most importantly, for the student who needs those services. So pushing into the classroom and delivering those services is really one of the gold standards that a lot of school districts are doing now. So after that, obviously you can have consultant teacher with related services and with the indirect services, so it kind of builds on depending on what you need. After that, you might have what we call special class. So a special class, and in New York State, special class is very specific in terms of what it means. So a special class will have a ratio. It can be 15 students to 1 teacher. That's generally for students who have only academic issues. They're pulled out of their classroom for a period of time to work on only their goals in that specific area, whatever that may be. Going down from there, and the one that we have identified as the highest level of need here at Garrison, is 12 students, 1 teacher, 1 paraprofessional. Those are for students who have academic needs and maybe some attention, behavioral, or emotional needs. So I know one of the questions was, how do we address emotional, attentional, behavioral needs? That's one of the ways we address them. The student may have goals in that area. They may have study skills goals. They may be learning how to take a test. They may be learning how to memorize information. They may be learning how to organize their information and working on their reading, writing, and math, and working on maybe sitting still, sitting up, applying themselves to tasks. So that's what we call a 12-1-1 special class. In other programs, in other school districts, you can go all the way down to 6 students 1 teacher, 4 paraprofessionals. Those are special classes for children who are medically fragile and have many more involved needs than the students that we have currently in our building. Do we have students like that? Yes, they are outplaced in other programs because we have a very finite number of those students. We don't have enough to build a program. So moving on from special class is resource room. Resource room is very specific again. 5 students, 1 teacher. You cannot go over that. The state will let you apply if you have a student move in and you, have 6. They will let you apply for it. They will not let you continue that. If you have 6, you either need to make a different program or you need to break into 2 classes. So they are monitoring those things and ensuring that we are delivering the appropriate level of services. Resource room, again, is a pull-out service. The students are working on very specifically their particular goals. And then moving on from there, and again, obviously, you can have all of those things. You can see you can actually be in and out of the class quite a lot of the day. Moving on from there, again, there are more stringent special classes where students spend whole portions of their day in a special class environment. Those students are not here. If we have students who need substantial chunks of their day with a special education teacher moving forward in the continuum, that's where we bring our consortium in. So we have a consortium with Putnam Valley Schools, we have a consortium with Haldane. We reach out to them and ask them, because they are part of what we call, again, our least restrictive environment, closest neighborhood schools, do you have a program for our students? We send them a packet of information only with parent consent. We send them a packet of information requesting that they have a placement for our child. Haldane doesn't usually have any of those programs. They're almost as small as we are. Putt Valley has many programs specifically for the students who need more services than we can provide because we are so small. They often fill up. So if we cannot get, and we have successfully had students go through the Putnam Valley program. If we cannot find placement or an appropriate program in Putnam Valley, we will go out to the next neighboring local school districts, but we don't have a consortium with them. So of course, that means our prices go up. Hate to say that, but that means that it changes, but we don't even look at that. We have to look at what's appropriate for our students. So we'll look at Peekskill, Lakeland, Hen Hud, Yorktown. We'll go all through there. We don't want our students on the bus for a tremendous amount of time, so we'll look as local as possible. We have had students in every one of those school districts and successfully go through their programs. After that, if we need more, or we don't have a program for them there, or they can't fit our needs, the next is our Board of Cooperative Services, our BOCES. We reach out to them and ask them, do you have a program for us? They have programs in local schools, so they have programs in Lakeland, Yorktown, Hen Hud, so we can actually get a student into that school district through BOCES. It's a different program, and different people are providing the services, but they have those programs as well.
BOCES has no programs currently in Phillipstown.
I have spoken to them about building a class. So what BOCES does is they reach out to local school districts and say, hey, we're looking to build, and this is exactly what they said to me, on this side of the county, because we are really far from, say, Mayapack. On this side of the county, we want to build a social emotional class. So Mayapack has what they call their Falls program, and it is a behavior therapy class using some of the techniques that we're actually doing here in our counseling groups, but as a whole class built on some of these therapeutic techniques for fragile students. So it's full, of course, because the entire county is sending students there, and it's really too far to send a Haldane or a Garrison student all the way out to Mayapack. So they reached out to us and said, what do you have? Do you have space? Do you have students? Because it has to be something that we actually benefit from. So we thought about it for a pocket of students, and what we realized was our students are not educationally similar enough, even in, say, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. The students that we would say bring back from out of district or already have in district are not educationally, emotionally, and behaviorally similar enough that we can build a special class program and put them all in that and have BOCES bring their own people in. It just wasn't going to work. So what we would have is BOCES sitting in one of our classrooms with students from all over the county. So, and they tax our services like our art, our music, our PE. We deliver that back to them. So we didn't feel like that was really beneficial. I mean, we had talked about it at one point. We tried to even build it on our own at one point. It just didn't seem like it was feasible to tax our services. They wouldn't tax our support services, but it would tax our other special services. And
When you say tax, you mean it would draw down.
it would put a strain. So, for example, I know I have a filter here. It would put art in a tough position.
When you say tax, people get nervous.
Right. Yes, understood.
Yeah.
But it would really create a problem for, say, art. He would have to educate those students. That would be how we would, have reciprocity with them and
I
give
see.
them something in return.
Is it point of rest? Sure.
When you mentioned the consortium, you mentioned that at a certain point you send the students. Is there like an age at which you say they're not meeting their goals? We need to look at the consortium.
It's when they're just not meeting their goals. When we feel we can no longer meet their needs, they're not meeting their goals, the team or the parent or the entire committee is saying this is not working anymore, we need to reach out to the consortium.
But there's no like definition of length. Like it's been a year and they're not meeting their goals. It's just when you.
No. And just, being completely transparent, most of those programs are for students who have multiple disabilities. Students who have autism, students who have multiple disabilities, students who can't be educated with their non-disabled peers because of their cognitive deficits. They're trying to build programs for students who have behavioral needs, but if you have a student with a behavioral need and an educational deficit, there are no programs. So the school districts are trying to build them, but they're not building them fast enough to meet the capacity of the students that are showing those deficit areas. We're seeing a lot of behavioral needs, but it's really, we're talking about fragile students who actually are meeting academic needs. They just can't do it because of their emotional frailties. So when we're looking at some of these programs, they don't exist for the typical, let's say, learning disabled student. They're not there. Not through other school districts, not through BOCES. They're just not available. Those students mostly have a program in-house in their school districts. So when we talk about not meeting goals, it's for those students who, for whatever reason, just really couldn't be educated in a public school situation. Any other questions?
You have more to do, right?
I could do an awful lot more.
Yeah.
Or I could shorten it. It's a lot, I know.
Matthew?
I had a question about accommodations in the classroom and when those kick in, and like at what grade do accommodations start on assessments and things?
On assessments?
Yeah, is there like a protocol for referrals that come in from the outside to say, this student's going to have extended time, for example, based on a
Referrals
deficit?
from where?
That's what I'm asking. I mean, can that be generated does that happen? I mean, can a 6th grade student or a 7th or 8th grade student have an outside referral come in from where and say the student requires extra time in class writing?
Who determines accommodations?
Yeah, I guess that's what
The
I'm
Committee
asking.
on Special Education.
And that's it?
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So
So
the
if-
diagnosis, the referral comes to a professional who provides a diagnosis. That diagnosis requires usually a particular intervention, accommodation, maybe a fair number of accommodations, but you determine that, right?
Sure. So say, for example, a student is given a diagnosis of ADHD.
Okay.
And they bring it forward to the Committee on Special Education, and the student meets the eligibility and is classified as other impaired for ADHD. We would immediately, right there, no matter what age that child was, whether they were 5 or whether they were, we only go up to 8th grade, so whether they were in kindergarten or 8th grade, we would immediately identify what do we need to do to support this child in class. Do they need specialized seating? Do they need extended time? Do they need, in general, classroom teachers can make any accommodations they want on any test they want, in any way they want to the environment, to the curriculum, or to the testing in their classroom. They cannot make accommodations on standardized testing. One really big piece here, that big standardized testing, the state testing that everyone's always concerned about, the big accommodation, extended time, isn't necessary anymore. There is no more time on the state tests. So things like questions read, all of those things, if they're being done in the classroom and the child needs it, it has to be on that child's IEP or plan, 504 plan, IEP. It has to be on there, and it can't go on there the week before the test, because that will be noted through the state, and they'll be like, wait a minute, you're really trying to bump your scores here. So it has to be identified and determined way before that, and then delivered not only in the classroom, because if you need it for the test, you had better need it in the classroom too. It's not a and/or, it's across the board. And if the child doesn't want it or doesn't use it, we start to talk about, do they really need this anymore? And if they don't need it, then we take it away. If they don't want it, that's another story. We work with that.
Can you just give us a question? Can you give us a sort of a broad approximation of, let's say, how many students, percentage of students come from preschool with, or have been referred
From preschool,
for preschool? Like what percentage? Like,
so
let's say there's 20 students in a class, or 30 students in a class, roughly. Does it tend to be a handful or
we have
none?
very low preschool numbers. When
Okay.
I go to my county meetings, I almost want to hide. Because everyone else has 30 or 40, and I think we have, to date, like 4 preschool students
Okay.
that are already identified having special education. They get the opportunity to be evaluated by our team. We do more. We have the right to do more, never less. Our neighboring school districts will not evaluate the 4-year-old students.
Right.
Say, we won't do it. We actually send our team, our school psychologist, speech pathologist, OT, we actually have the child come to us, meet the parents, do the evaluation, and determine eligibility rather than just say, no, you're not eligible.
All right, so so there's a grade of, say they're all the same age. You have 4, so that's 20% roughly, or maybe.
We have 4
15 to-
now, they're not all 4 years
Okay,
old.
good.
Yeah, they can be, there's 1 4-year-old, nope, 2 4-year-olds, and 2 potential 3-year-olds.
All right, so maybe, I don't know, like, so there's maybe 10% or something every year, right? How many students get referred when they're in kindergarten?
Yeah.
First grade?
Maybe 1, possibly 2 per year, depending.
When do
big
you
year?
see I'm guessing,
Second.
second grade, because that's when you're seeing the language issues,
That's when you're
Reading
seeing
issues.
hardline academics.
reading issues. So it's not, your referrals that are coming earlier are either behavioral or something else.
They're either a diagnosis of autism, they're either serious language components, or there's something else.
So second grade is 7 years old, right?
That's
And
when we start to see
typically
learning
when you see
disabilities.
dyslexic tendencies not correct themselves.
Right. You could see them, or you could see soft signs earlier on.
Right.
When you see a child not making progress through our intervention program, and you may be able to refer, identify, and get enough data to give them the possibility of
How will their
eligibility.
education change when that happens?
So once they're found eligible, how will their
Yeah, you
education
come in, you're a
change?
kindergartner, you're, playing around, you're doing your thing, you're learning how to walk down the hallway, right? Say yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, right? All that,
Mhm.
we hope, right? And then they go through their academic experience, and maybe there's some little behavior issues, and then second grade, we're seeing some unsettling scores or some issues, and then how does their education change after that?
We start to deliver services. We
Okay.
start to attack their goals.
Mhm.
We benchmark. So every student is benchmarked.
Mhm.
Special education students are benchmarked more regularly on their goals. So
Right.
we're tracking their progress. If they're, say, in kindergarten, supposed to come out of kindergarten knowing numbers up to 100,
Mhm.
and they only know 10 coming in, and we say they're eligible, we're going to start saying, by November we want 20. By January we want 30, and we're watching that progress. And if they're not making that progress, the team will meet and say, it's not working, I need to try a different approach. I'm going to try, and there are, the special education teachers know what approaches they want to try, and if they don't, we keep asking those questions, they may seek other professionals.
So they're going to be pulled out, you know, and sorry, but they're going to be pulled out, or they're going to be getting services either pushed in or pulled out.
Right, yes.
And the services they're going to get are derived from the diagnosis, or are they from what the CSE is determining as appropriate pedagogical tools or instructional tools in order to meet the needs of the
Right.
particular cognitive performance?
Right, not the diagnosis. A diagnosis
Yeah.
may give the child eligibility,
Right.
but the diagnosis alone doesn't prescribe a standard protocol.
Right.
So it's not like chemotherapy. You
Right,
can
yeah,
get
right.
it from Columbia Presbyterian and then bring it here to your local hospital, and chemo is chemo.
Right.
So it's not like that. It is, you see the child, you recognize the child's learning strengths and weaknesses, you determine the appropriate level of supports and goals, you determine what the place is to deliver them and who will deliver them. It's a combination of many people, and then you track it.
So, let's say the diagnosis was a reading issue, a language-based learning disability, right? And they're having some issues with decoding, right? So we offer like a Wilson program or something, right? Maybe
A multi-sensory program.
or an Orton Gillingham or something, correct?
Mhm.
Okay. Would any of that type of instruction already be happening anyway in the K1 and 2?
Yes. So we are
You see where I'm getting at?
delivering, so response to intervention is mandated by New York State.
Right.
So any child, even before they're referred, so if the in-house committee wants to refer a child for special education, they have had to have already done response to intervention.
Right.
That's a team. Not all CSE members are also on that team. There are other general education members on that team who
Right.
have specialized literacy or reading certifications, and they are identifying through the benchmarking and through teacher recommendations students already at the kindergarten level that they have concerns about. And they're either in the classroom or pulling out, delivering those services. If the child is not making progress, we switch gears and start new strategies and new strategies and new strategies, and we start adding on strategies and tiers of support until we are hit the top tier and we say, not working, referral to special education.
So is the magic year the end of second grade or the beginning of second grade?
It depends on the student.
Okay.
It really does. It depends on the class, the teacher and the parent and the team referral. Sometimes students are referred before they really need to be referred.
If they are in the RTI program, there's a lot of questions, but these are questions that weigh heavily on my mind. So if they're in the RTI program or they qualify for some sort of intervention, right? And that intervention I'm trying to say this so that is the intervention different than what the general education is getting as far as the technique for teaching?
They're double dosing something, so what we find with many of our students is repetition.
So it's just a matter of repetition,
They-
a matter of
Not
practice.
just, but it
Well,
could
right,
be
right.
other specially designed instruction, different programs that they're using for reading. So the teacher has their standard protocol, and they're manipulating that and
Right.
modifying that to meet the needs of their students. That's called differentiation. And
Right.
we're required in New York State to do that too, again, highly regulated. So they're differentiating for their students. Differentiation is not a special education term, that is a
Right,
general
right.
education term.
Just general.
So they're doing that, and then if they're identified, the literacy teachers or the teachers who are delivering the response to intervention are bringing in different and new strategies while also overlaying and overshadowing what the general education teacher is doing. So if we're doing a program in the classroom and they're pulling them out, say 8th period for their RTI, they may be doing some of that all over again. So we call it like a double dose
Okay.
of some of those pre-reading and early reading strategies that what we find, and this has been in the literature for years, because reading is such a huge part of our lives and such a huge part of education, that in any classroom you could have a third of the students who just get it on their own. Like they just figure it out and they learn how to read. You can have a third of the students who, with time and a little bit of support, they figure it out. It may take them till 2nd or 3rd grade, but somehow they, on their own, figure it out, close the gap, and it clicks and they learn how to read. And then you have a third that might need something else.
Mhm.
And Some of them need just intervention, and some of them need to move on to specially designed instruction, special education.
Okay.
And you should have a very finite number of those students because of the regulations.
Are we currently screening the kindergartners, the first and the second graders for dyslexia, reading things?
Not specifically for dyslexia, we are using all the benchmark tools. We're doing our Pontus and Canals, we're doing all the benchmarking, and that's screening for everything. We're not using anything specifically for dyslexia. No school district is doing that. We're using the standards across the board that generate a tremendous amount of information on what children across the state should know. And so there's pros and cons to doing a very specific screening because you could red flag students who don't necessarily need that service. And then you're bogging down the system. So we're doing the same benchmarks across the board. We're looking at students. We're grouping students accordingly in their classroom, outside of their classroom, and then determining appropriate supports and services.
Would we be able to, if the legislation that's currently set up in Albany, like if it passes, because there is a bill right now saying that it would state mandate dyslexia, dysgraphia, would we be set up to do that starting?
If there was legislation and it passed and it said it was a mandate that school districts had to do that, we would have to do it. We would have no choice. So that would just, it would happen across the board. I would go to BOCES. BOCES would say, here's your screening, and every school district would take it back and start delivering it. So we would have to. But until then, the standards and the practice across school district is we're going to do these blanket screenings, and every good kindergarten and first grade teacher can identify those students. They know. They look at those students and they say, I think something's not right here. We need to bring this to the team and put another layer for this student. And I can honestly tell you, we've already met on kindergarten. I was meeting on kindergarten last Wednesday. So kindergarten first, we already met on. They were meeting, I think they were meeting on a grade today. I wasn't there for it today, but they were already meeting. They're in process.
What's our do we still have a phonics-based program in K1 and 2?
I can't answer the kindergarten instruction. I do think it's phonics-based.
Okay. I'm curious, that's all. Okay.
How often do you run into the situation of either of getting a referral from either a parent or a classroom teacher for a child that you then, after going through all the procedures, doesn't meet regulations, and basically you find that they are not eligible for services? Do they get put into a separate category so they're watched and evaluated more regularly, or you just say, nope, no, can't do?
We definitely have referrals that either it's too early to identify the students, but we do have questions. If we have a situation like that, that student is already in the intervention process, and we're just watching and waiting, and we might in 6 months reevaluate again, and then we say, we got it. Or we may say to the parent, we need another evaluation, we need to go to BOCES, we need a neuropsych, we need a psychiatric, we need something else, we need a diagnosis, and then we might actually be able to capture the students. So there are some students where we get to eligibility and we're like, we don't have enough. There are other students, people think that it's potentially a disability, there's an area of weakness, but again, for most of the areas of disability, and if we're looking at a learning disability, I mean, if a child has a language-based disability, we start to recognize that pretty early on. But if we're looking at a learning disability, again, there has to be a discrepancy between their cognitive process and their academics. So if, for example, a student in the classroom is a B student, if their academics on standardized testing are commensurate with that, somewhere in the low average range, and their cognitive skills are in the low average range, they're not eligible. Everything's flat across the board. That's not a learning disability. It has to be something here and something here, and a cognitive process like memory getting in the way of it. And we have to prove that. So if you have a student who's not meeting benchmarks in the classroom, and then you go ahead and evaluate them and you find, well, actually, they're within normal limits, but they're low average. That's not a learning disability. That's one of your response to intervention students who may never be, a 4 on a state test. It's just, there's a bell curve for a reason, and You have to have those students who are on the low end. Somebody is going to be on the low end, and somebody will be on the high end. That's the way of the world. That's the way we are. They have their own personal learning strengths and weaknesses. It's our responsibility as an educational system to identify that, whether it is through special education or not, but to push the child into something that helps them to flourish. So maybe they're an art student. Maybe that's a pathway for them. Maybe foreign language is a pathway. Maybe they're a musician. So it might not be special education, but they might never really be a solid academic student. So it happens, unfortunately. But if a student is found ineligible and we're still wondering, we will track them and watch them, and they may come back again 6 months later. I mean, we have had students who we've evaluated them literally every year, and it keeps coming back, and then finally we're like, we hit it.
When that happens, when you ask for more information from like a neuropsych outsider or something, do you know who pays for that? Is the family responsible for paying for an outside consulting, or is there a fund that helps cover students?
If the Committee on Special Education recommends that we need a different evaluation, neuropsych and psychiatric, something like, it's generally one of those two things.
Mhm.
Or say a bilingual evaluation if it's an English language learner. We would go to BOCES. We have a contract with BOCES. That's what they're there for. They're there for us. And we say to them, this is what we need. It's what we call a COSER with BOCES, so we have a special price. We contract with that person individually. We get the BOCES price for it, and we, the CSE, the school district, are responsible for that. We don't do anything without the parent. The parent is a 100% part of the process. We only give to that private evaluator anything that the parent already has in their hands. We don't have private conversations with them. If the parent goes and does it on their own and has a $3,000 bill, that is not a school district evaluation. If they seek that on their own, and some parents do, if they seek it on their own without the Committee on Special Education, that's their private evaluation. The committee can look at it. They do not have to accept the private evaluation or any of the recommendations. If a parent goes for private evaluation, if that private evaluator hasn't been given our evaluations that were done first, the first one stands. The private evaluation goes up because the first evaluation is the one that needs to be used. If they use the same tool, that's negated. So it's like standard practice with the testing criteria and the people who are doing the tests. You cannot repeat tests within a certain time frame.
So, question? One of the things that's, a lot of people have a difficult time understanding or sort of dealing with is that you can, special education special education services are triggered through law, for the most part, right? And statute and mandate by the state. RTI is mandated by the state, but it's not triggered through law. It's triggered through, I guess, concern and state test performance, right?
It's built into the state regulations.
Right, but it doesn't require the kind of referral processes or anything like that. So what often folks are experiencing is kind of maybe an underperformance in a particular area. Let's say it's a particular reading skill or reading strategy or something that they're not doing. And maybe they don't qualify for services, and yet the kind of services that they would provide might prove to effective in intervening. But this process, as we just talked about, if it doesn't happen in preschool or K, it's not going to happen until second grade.
Most likely not. In the area of reading, most
figuring out what's what may not exactly, like whether this is a developmental thing and they'll just grow out of it, that may not happen, and you're hitting the proper service. It may not happen in fourth grade, right? Just because of different eyes on the child, different, right?
It truly is.
And then at that point, you're going from learning to read to reading to learn.
Agreed.
So in fifth grade, you're supposed to go fetch your knowledge through reading as opposed to being trained how to read. That's the theory.
And that's how response to intervention was born.
Right. And the question is how do we ensure that we can increase I think one concern is a lot of this is a question of driven out of maybe teacher concern, first contact concern, parental concern, and I guess a lot, one eyes on a child, one pair of eyes on a child is not enough,
Agreed?
right? So the question is, how early can we get our concerns, established so that the services can be engaged as quickly as possible, so that we can go through this process in more.
It happens early. I mean, I can honestly say.
Well, definitely with special ed, it's just that RTI area or
Right,
that.
it's gray. It's definitely gray RTI. And the reason it was put into place is specifically for what you're mentioning.
Right.
Because what they were finding is students were hitting 4th grade, and they, in the olden days, back when, 20 some odd years ago, to be eligible for learning disability, you had to have, it was like a formula. You had to have, say, if you had an IQ of 100, you had to have standardized test results that were 20 plus points lower than that, so you had to have an 80. Okay, that's maybe not hard to do, very hard to do on a kindergartner because of the way the tests pull for your educational knowledge as a kindergartner. You're not expected to know very much as a kindergartner. So right away, a kindergartner who says their colors and their letters and their numbers, they're going to do very well on the teacher. I have a couple of concerns about a couple of students. Can the OT come in and take a look-see? OT is like, yes, I'll be in this, this, and this day. Special education teacher is, yes, I'll be in this, this, and this day. Everybody goes and looks at the student. We talk about it. If needed, it goes to RTI. If not, it's just a constant check-back system. So the process is starting. It's just you have to give those little guys a chance to develop. And if we're watching their progression, by the time they're getting to the end of 1st grade, we may have had 4 RTI meetings on them. And finally, the 1st grade teacher may say, are we going to do this evaluation at the end of 1st grade? Or are we going to do this evaluation at the beginning of 2nd grade? And that's sometimes a very tricky question.
Right.
Sometimes you want to wait because the way the tests are normed, this is all statistical, the way the test is normed by grade, you're expected to know so much more as a 2nd grader. So we will capture that student if we wait 3 months. So it's a little bit of playing with the law, and that's when I say we are on the side of caution. We, as the professionals who are doing the testing, we know how to look at the test and recognize if we evaluate that child too soon, we're not going to get what we're looking for. We can flip through the test and go, they know it, they know it, they know it, they know it. Give it a couple of months, let's see what happens. And that's where we get into this. Everyone's getting concerned because time is passing. But meanwhile, intervention is actually still happening. And a lot of times, especially at the 2nd grade level, where we're starting to deliver those consultant teacher services, that special education teacher is already going, come sit next to me, it's okay, we'll work together. So we're already having the special education teacher do a little look-see on that child and start to deliver a little bit more specially designed instruction before. So, and again, sometimes if they're doing it well enough, what happens? The child makes progress and now they don't qualify. So it's a very fine line, it's a balance. So, it's very, very tricky and it's also, as you can tell, very complicated.
At what point are parents brought into the loop of that? The scenario you were just describing. So you've got the kindergartner teacher saying, okay, I've got a concern about a couple kids, bringing in, having OT observe. At what point, is this all just happening within the school? Are there emails also going off to the parents saying, just so you know, we're keeping an eye on little so-and-so, or not until
The law
later on?
says we don't have to. The law says in New York State, we do not, RTI used to be called child study or child study teams way back in the day. The law said you don't have to let a parent know you're looking at their child. We don't do that. We will call them and say, have the OT come and look in at their cutting skills. They're fine. We're going to move on. The OT said do this, this, and this. It's good. She's going to call you and make recommendations. All good. We'll see you later. Or the OT is watching and has some sensory concerns. She said whenever she's there, they can come down to the sensory gym. We'll see how it goes, and we'll check back in with you. And maybe then the parent will say, oh, I had preschool services for that. And then all of a sudden it starts the connections, and we start to watch a little bit more closely. So depending on that first initial contact with the related service or the professional, once we have that first contact and have somebody look in, you don't want just one pair of eyes, once somebody else goes in and confirms the teacher's concerns, then we start calling the parents in. It's not fair to the parents to wait till second grade. No one would want that to all of a sudden. Hi, we've been watching you for 3 years now.
Right.
Not okay. Some school districts do that. Again, they all of a sudden call and say we're referring to special education. Larger school districts don't have the manpower and the time, and not that they don't have the concern and care for their students, but they just don't have the ability to do it. We're very fortunate that we have a lot of people who are able to step in and contact the parent. Usually the classroom teacher.
One last question for the board, or questions from the board? Okay, go for it.
Parent question?
It's okay, sir, I'm not in the room.
Go for it. Why don't we hear from,
Are you sure Sharon might ask the same question?
yeah. Go for it.
Dr. Belkir?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tamara Stubbs. I have a 6th grader, 4th grader, and 2nd grader. One receives special education help, one's on a 504, 405. Finally got it right. I have 2 questions. One is, in your role and the role of the department, what is frustrating for you that you wish that you could change? Because I think you've painted a very nice picture of the intervention and how everything works, but I would love to hear what is frustrating. And secondly, I would love to know how the special education group is evaluated. Like, what makes your area successful? So I imagine for teachers, there's something that says you need to do this, this, and this, and we look at state scores and we look at this. Like, what is it for special education that helps you drive the success and the outcome, and who defines that? So I know you've spoken about legislator. I imagine if you go against legislation, that's probably pretty bad. So imagine that as a bad thing. But how else, or what else are you evaluated on?
So I'll start with evaluation. So to evaluate our programs, we watch the goals, and we look at how our teachers are getting professional development and meeting those goals, and how comfortable they feel with the ongoing changes in education. There's plenty of professional development through our BOCES, and many of our teachers seek that. We're also very lucky. A lot of development is brought in, professional development is brought into our school districts, so teachers are getting a tremendous amount of work in reading, writing, and math. So we evaluate the effectiveness of our programs based on how well our students are doing. How many are meeting their goals? How many are declassified? We do actually have students that we declassify, and that's a success. Declassification does not mean that the student is now grade level. So the goal is special education, and that's what really, that may be one of the things I wish I could change. I wish I could change parents and teachers' understanding of what it means to have a child with a disability. It doesn't mean you're back to 100% just like your non-disabled peers. It means you still have an area of weakness. You still have something that you're struggling with. You have successfully learned interventions and strategies and have met successful benchmarks to be efficient enough, to be productive enough to get through the curriculum. The unfortunate piece of that is, across the United States, some of those benchmarks are fairly low. So for a child to be considered successful in reading, the average reading level is like 3rd or 4th grade.
Right.
To be successful, 3rd or 4th grade, you could read the newspaper. I mean, you might not be able to read like physics or calculus or some really intense college-bound book. You would get support services in college for that, most likely. But to be successful, 3rd or 4th reading level. If we can get your student to 3rd and 4th grade reading level, we feel successful because you will be successful for the rest of your life. It's not meant to bring the child up to their actual grade level. You're always going to have students who are struggling. It's part of the normal curve. So that's one of the, I think, answering both of those questions together, one of the frustrating pieces is it's really hard to explain to parents, this does not go away, they're not growing out of this, and that unfortunately the laws are built to keep students out of special education, not open the floodgates and let them in. It's supposed to be a very specific and finite number of students. And although we want to help all of their students, because obviously everyone loves their children, I mean, they're your babies. And you know, most of us as teachers have children as well, so we understand, once we have children of our own, we certainly understand how you feel, and we understand what it must be like to kind of walk this walk with your teachers, but we certainly have these laws that are holding us back, and that's the frustrating piece, I think. That I wish that we could do more. I wish there were more programs. We just can't seem to move fast enough, and we're not the only state. New Jersey is struggling, Connecticut is struggling, they're all struggling. We just can't move fast enough to meet the needs of our students, particularly in certain areas of like autism, learning disabilities, and the behavioral and anxiety pieces. We just can't. It's a tough spot to be in, but we're chipping away at it, and we have to be positive and think towards, a brighter future and hope for more success.
So the evaluation of the program is solely based on the kids and how they're progressing and if they declassify. There's no financial component that you operate within budget. There's no.
I don't do that piece. That's really more administrative, so I couldn't answer those questions. I mean, certainly the program is evaluated. Obviously, the teachers, as special education teachers, they're evaluated. You look at the effectiveness in terms of how many students, how many teachers. For example, years ago, we had a special class, a communication class, and we looked at the program, and we had one Garrison student and 2 students from Haldane, and we had 3 adults in the room, 1 educator and 2 aides. And we sat down and we said, wait a minute, this is not a viable option anymore. The students are not making enough success that they will, that the 3 left, 2 of them graduated out and went on to general education, so that was successful. But the 3 that were left, should we be holding a program that should have 8 students and 3 adults? Should we be holding this program? And we disbanded the program, and they went back to district, and we sent our student out of district. It was more financially appropriate for us to send the student out of district, and there's state aid formulas and all of those things. But it was more financially appropriate for us and better for the student to have a classroom full of services rather than sit there with 2 other students who we weren't sure were going to stay because they weren't our students anyway. So that's how there are other ways we measure it. Some of it is on more of the administrative level, not the CSE level.
How many students do we have out of district? How many students do we have that are sent out of district?
We actually don't have very many. Some of them have moved on past 8th grade. We have 4 to date. 4.
And how often are you required, or is someone required to visit those students at their school, follow up, make sure that they're in the right place?
There's no requirement, believe it or not.
None?
There are some school districts, and I actually got a call from a school just this week, your student is ready to come back. And I said, ooh, you have to give me some time here. Wait a minute, I wasn't ready, it's only 6 weeks. And they said, you're considering that you would talk to us about this, and you're telling me they're coming back. And they said, well, some school districts drop their students off at 5 years old and never come back. So no, that doesn't happen in Garrison. There is no requirement to go out. They're housed over there. We pay them. They deliver the services, but we don't do that. I go out and observe them minimally once. For the little ones, I go twice. For the ones of concern, I might go twice or 3 times. I observe the students. I meet the team. I'm constantly emailing the team and the principal of the school or the director of the program. I meet with the parents. I get all the testing results. I get the updates and the benchmarks and the IEP report cards all year long. If there's a problem, we reach out, or they reach out to us, whether it's a busing issue or a technology issue or a behavioral issue. Something needs to be changed, we step in, and at the end of the year, at the annual review, again, not a requirement, but I actually go to the school district or the school that we place them and sit with the team and the parent in-house in their school, rather than the parent is sitting with me here at Garrison and the school is calling in. There's no requirement. I don't know whether the school districts do that. I don't ask my colleagues. But we're Garrison, we're small, and it's the right thing to do. So if you have a child at BOCES, I should go to BOCES, and I should see your child, and I should be sitting with the BOCES team, and they appreciate that. And the parents appreciate it, because they want to be there with the people actually working with their children. I'm just a figurehead at that point. So unfortunately, there is.
So if the
limited.
law doesn't do some of these processes, we're requiring a professional judgment, or we set up a policy or procedure that pertains to our district. Say-
We do what's right for them.
Okay.
And I think that that's pretty much been our standard across the board. We do more, and we try to do it with the thought that, you know, this is somebody's child.
And I wanted to get to Tamar's point. Is there anything else you wish you had that the board should know?
Honestly, no. I mean, I think that I wish there were a better way to explain the regulations to parents so that they didn't feel it had to be confrontational at the table. That they didn't feel that we, the CSE, were holding them back or holding their child back. That sometimes we don't have the answers, or because sometimes children have unique situations and that it may take us time to have the answers. We will try to uncover them and do our best. But that sometimes we just, because of the regulations, can't do more. We're a public school. And that's unfortunate. We can't go beyond what's required of a public school. We can in certain areas, but when it comes to the law, we can't go outside of the box of what's expected.
Do you think we
by
have to
state ed.
improve our communications around these issues?
I would love it if parents would read the parent handbook. It is on the website. We definitely ensured that the parent guide for special education is on the website. It has an excellent Q&A at the end for any questions that parents might have that are unusual. I respect parents who call state ed, their representative, and ask those questions, and state ed will call me back and say, this parent called, and you know, maybe you want to go through this process again with them. So I respect that. I respect parents who ask for their parent number. That's how I know the parent actually read their rights. It's the first time ever in 5 years I've had a request, and I thanked the parent. I said, this is amazing that you know, as a parent really sat down and read that paperwork that came home to you. I want parents to read their IEPs. They have a lot of information, and if they don't understand them, come back to us. We'll explain them even more clearly, or just really break it down. I think sometimes parents take it and they're not sure, and they're afraid to ask the questions because it is, some of the lingo in there is complicated. We try not to make it complicated, but sometimes it is. So those are some of the wishes. I mean, other than that, we have a great school district.
Does the obligation fall to the district, though, to ensure that the parent understands the IEP? Is that
They
is
agree.
that our burden?
Yes.
Right?
We ask the questions at the CSE. They agree with the goals. They agree with the program. They sign consent. And then we don't hear from them for a year. And then we come back to the next year, and we're at the same meeting the next year later, and sometimes they're still not clear. And we go over it again, and then sometimes we'll get to like 7th grade, and then they'll say, what happened? And we have maybe 6 IEPs to pull out and say, you signed this, and you signed this, and we don't do that. But you know, we're very, very understanding of the fact that this is a language that, unless you're an educator, it's a foreign language. You may not understand it. So we tell the parents, call us. You don't have to wait for your annual review. You don't have to wait for a CSE meeting. You can call a meeting with me. You can call a meeting with your special education teacher, your classroom teacher, or all the people. It doesn't have to be an official meeting. It can just be a meeting. And we set team meetings, especially at the middle school level. Sometimes that transition to middle school is hard. So we set those meetings, and we ask the parents at the end of the year, would you like us to set that meeting up for you, or would you like to do it yourself? And then we'll document it in the minutes of our IEP so that it's clear who's doing that information, or we'll set a follow-up task for ourselves. It's clear we're following up with that parent, we're setting a meeting for them. So we try to have those lines of communication open. Sometimes there's still questions, and they don't know what question to ask sometimes.
For the purposes of our time and sanity, I think we might want to take as many notes and questions as possible, and then submit them through Laura if there's follow-up questions and concerns and thoughts that we might, does that seem healthy?
Can I ask for one more?
Yes.
I think if you have the number. Okay. I'm looking at an old presentation
that was given to the board from 2016. If I'm reading the paragraph correctly, it looked like it says number of special needs students, enrollment of 210 students, and there were approximately 37 or 38 students who were part of the CSE. It says CSE and 504. Just curious what the number is right now. How many?
Sure.
CSE means IEP. That's not 504.
Right,
Okay.
correct.
So
So I don't have the total number of enrollments off the top of my head.
that's okay.
And for the purpose of this meeting, I do have the CSE number. I do not have the 504 number. I can follow up with that. Currently, right now, at the start of September, so in your documents, you have some of the state ed pieces. So our snapshot is October. It's about to be loaded or is currently loaded. So that's when we do our annual reporting. So as of prior to the snapshot, when that was captured, we had 37 classified students. So what's important is students age out onto the high school level, students come in from the preschool level, students are declassified. So you can see through the snapshots year to year, the ups and downs. It's steadily gone up. In the past 5 years that I have been here, we've had 6 students move into district with an IEP. They're seeking us out or they're seeking out this community. Within that 6 and the total 37, 2 of the incoming students from this year, 4 came in this year, 2 of them are no longer eligible. So we're actually down to 35. So that review process happened as soon as they entered the building. We started and we recognized they came from preschool.
So we're talking 35
Currently 35.
CSE.
CSA.
And bigger, similar number with the 504.
Much less.
Much less.
Much
okay.
less, maybe 10.
And how many doing RTI kind of work?
That I don't have the data on.
I can get that data. You have questions, Jill?
Yeah, so the state document that explains special education and parents' rights, it hasn't been updated since 2003, and the state, on their website, they say, we're working on this. Do you happen to know when they're going to get it done?
I see state ed every month, twice a month, preschool and CSE level. Still working on it.
My
It's
lord.
unfortunate. I have to say, that document was barely updated in 2003. It's been pretty much the same since I got my master's degree a long time ago. It hasn't changed, and that's unfortunate because education has changed and special education has somewhat changed. It's unfortunate. You know, if we could pressure someone to move faster, that would be fantastic, but it's not moving.
Any other questions? Oh, okay. All right, I would recommend that board members definitely take the time to reflect upon this presentation. This is my second one, so I thank you. But this is a new board, and we have to orient ourselves about the processes and the procedures and some of the gray areas that we delve into. If I see a gray area, I sort of go right toward it. It's a good place. So I think if we have questions, we might be receiving questions through Laura. Okay?
Yeah.
All right, terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening and drive safely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is, we go on the public comment, I believe, right? Yeah, okay. Thank you. President's announcements. I don't have many announcements other than to say that we sent out a letter regarding Route 9, which has appeared in the PCNR already, and we have received responses from the sheriff as well regarding Route 9. And so I think, just want to let you know that that's the case. I think that's about it. Yeah? Anything else that I should mention? I think we're good. All right. Superintendent's remarks.
I just want to say publicly, thank you to Jennifer Muller. That was very informative, very succinct, laid a real strong foundation of who we are as a school district and where we are in serving our special ed students. I know it took a lot for her to put together, so I'm very appreciative of her time and being here this evening. So, bravo, Jennifer Muller. And then another bravo is to the Board of Education. In your folders, you will see a School Board Recognition Week certificate. So, not just from the board, the school board, but from us as well. We know this is a tough job. We know it's volunteer. We know you're not getting paid. It requires a lot of time. It requires time and difficult, sometimes uncomfortable decisions and discussions. And please know that we know that your intention and your approach is good for our district. We want everybody here to be successful and only strong when we're together, and that's why we're all wearing orange together today, with you, except for you, but we know your orange is around you, your aura. So thank you for your time and ongoing support as a board.
Oh, you're welcome. I just want to thank the board for all their hard work already. This has been a pretty intense, first few months for many of you, so thank you.
I just have 4 points this evening. We had an outage last week, and we decided to send our after-school students home. So we held the buses, we made the phone calls, but unfortunately we had a failure in our system, and one family was not contacted mistakenly. So I want to say, and the district wanted to say, we're sincerely sorry that it happened. We're glad everything is okay, and we're just going to use this experience to improve our procedures moving forward. So I wanted to make sure that that was said properly as well, and acknowledge that it's scary for a parent when you don't know where your child is. And again, we're glad it is okay, but we will use this as an opportunity to gain strength in our procedures. Stop the Bleed. During one of our professional learning days, our teacher aides were trained by our nurse Melissa in Stop the Bleed. And this is a type of training that's used to save lives in the school and outside of the school. It empowers the public to take action when there's life-threatening bleeding, compression, packing, tourniquet. I was there for it all as well. When they're following injuries or crashes, acts of violence, and natural disasters. It says, don't be a bystander, stop the bleed. That's exactly who we are as a district as well. We do Narcan training, we do CPR training, we do Stop the Bleed training. We're trying to empower the community, our parents, our kids, our staff, so that we can save one another, look out for one another, keep each other safe, in-house and out-of-house. So thank you, Nurse Melissa, and the teacher aides who are participating. I want to send a shout out to Kevin Keegan, Megan O'Brien, and Barbara Valesio in the back. They took our 7th and 8th graders on a day to the Hudson River. It's called The Day in the Life of the Hudson River. So they spent most of the day down by the river netting fish, and they identified them using their observations and questions and resources. Another group was observing and charting the tide. Another group was testing the water using salinity and phosphates and oxygen levels and more. And I also want to say thank you to Mr. Pete from the Beacon Institute of Rivers and Estuaries, Greg from Taconic Outdoor Education, and volunteers Karen Nelson, who's one of our parents, and Lisa McCallie for teaching, guiding, and fostering a love for the Hudson River. It was a great day. I was able to spend time with them down there as well. And we'll put pictures on all of our social media.
Terrific. Was that funded at all, that particular program?
I don't know. I don't
Just
think it was
organized.
a G-set.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. And then just lastly, I want to talk about committees and study teams. We presented some ideas during our district priority presentations, and we brought in the idea of study teams and maybe redesigning or refining committees. So first of all, I want to apologize for the delay in getting our committees up and running. It's just that we're currently working on a possible new model for committees, and we just need more time to design and discuss with the staff before we bring it to the community and the board for feedback. The purpose of re-envisioning committee work is twofold. We'd like the study groups to drive the foundational work by delving deep into the priorities, and the priorities are instructional technology, math, writing, and environmental education, and having those study groups gather and analyze data, explore new programs, look at the programs that we currently have, review literature in the areas, and visit other schools, and sort of bring that information together and then share it during committees or parent workshops. Mostly in the evenings is what we were talking about with staff, but we still certainly haven't solidified it yet, because we want to increase parent involvement. When we had those sign-in sheets for the committees, there are many parents who can't, and community members who can't commit to 3:30 in the afternoon. So that model is not working. So we thought, let's rethink what we're doing and what's the purpose of our committees, what's the purpose of our study groups, what's the purpose of our parent workshops, and see if we can share what we are doing and open up, have opportunities for dialogue with our community and parents at a different time, possibly. And so that's sort of the things we're thinking about. We don't have it quite framed out or concrete. We want to talk more with the staff and see what are the times, too. Can we have these study groups? Time is always the issue, the barrier, the problem, the challenge, because we want to do so many things beyond the teaching and learning that we're doing, but we want to explore new programs. We want to see, what we're doing. Is it working? Is it not working? What are the deficits? What are the things we want to continue working on? And all of that requires a lot of time, and finding that time during the day, and if people can commit to after school. So we're just sort of looking at schedules and programs and teacher interest, teacher aid interest. So we'll keep you posted. We hope to come to you with more solid framework or draft framework November 6th. That's the hope.
Questions for the superintendent? I think that I think it's important that just that we communicate effectively with each other regarding this particular aspect of committee work, and making sure that we're just trying to work together as much as possible, and coming up with possible models or solutions so that everyone's being understood. And if there's no one of my pet peeves is, unnecessary misunderstanding. Right? So it's important for us to sort of communicate. But thank you for that. Principal's remarks?
Evening, everyone. So we've been quite busy the past few weeks, and a few things that have been featured. So all this week is Drop Everything Read. So we had the pleasure of a number of author visits. So thanks very much to our PTA. So many dedicated parents who've dedicated time, hour scheduling. Kids had the pleasure of meeting Allison Tacky this past, or actually it was yesterday. Yes, it is. Over at the Desmond Fish Library. So we appreciate, as always, their support and kindness. Elisha Cooper had come about a few weeks back and also had his presentation as well. Wonderful book that he shared with us. River as well. The kids were really engaged with that conversation, just hearing about his development, not only as an author, but as an illustrator himself. And we'll be having Mr. Michael Buckley come in for tomorrow as well. So again, tremendous thank you for not only this, but also as you walk out, take a look at some of the books that are out as well. Book fairs all this week as well, which has been great. One of the great things too that we've featured this week, and the last opportunity will be on Friday from 2 to 2:30. If any parents, family members would like to come in and read, the halls are just filled with books and children strewn about, along with some cases their siblings. So it was really nice to just see that, and just a great time for us to just share together all through the hallways. We appreciate them making that time, whether it was in the afternoon or the evening as well. Some really great moments that we had too. A lot of great photographs. I couldn't fit all of them, so more to come. Again, thank you to our parents we've had. The meal is not affiliated. This is a different. This is the one of our Pizza Friday teams. Not to be mixed up with the very well plated meal. That is something that I appreciate the parents going ahead and. Because I always try to get a picture that captures it. That I think they did it best. And this was the team that was responsible for that delicious meal. Tacos about a month ago as well. It's great to walk through the hallways, and very kind as well that each time. Again, the PTA is kind enough to offer that meal for all the staff, which we really do appreciate as well. So just speaks to how much time everyone's dedicating. We appreciate it. As do the kids, of course. A few weeks back, we did have some tough days, I think, for all of us. What was nice, Mr. Frank Guglieri, as well as our partners in Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES, were kind enough to put us in contact with an organization that could provide Leah, who had actually visited our staff back in late August, just to introduce herself. Actually had cards that were distributed with her name on it. So actually our staff held on and said, oh, is it possible perhaps she may pay us a visit? So as you can see, whether it was a need or not, it was just nice that our kids, and I think all of us, found a little bit of comfort that day in whatever we needed. So again, we appreciate our partners with Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES and for their continued support. And as you can see, we're all in our orange for the day. Mr. Young had orange head to toe. He's now since changed. But we had as the kids are walking through as well. So it was nice. We have this day, which is National Unity Day, which celebrates kindness, acceptance, and just inclusion of students. And that is in the midst of National Anti-Bullying Month as well. We did have, thanks to Ms. Diego, who had submitted a grant proposal that was kindly supported by our GSEF organization. Mr. Jared Campbell was due to speak and present to grades 3 through 8 today. Unfortunately, he fell a little ill and did not have his voice. He was kind enough to reschedule, so we will have that opportunity to have that important conversation with those grades Monday, November 4th. So again, thank you to Ms. Diego, Ms. Van Decker for really putting in a lot of work in organizing that for our kids as well. And in that spirit, just always a reminder too of all the people that are important in driving the success of each of our students, and that they are always at the focal point of what we do. So it's nice to see that really come to fruition in so many ways. And busy few weeks, so just reminders about the book fair this Friday as well. Our first responders in the ambulance corps, as well as our fire department, will be coming in and joining our kids as they have each year. So thank you to them for making time to join us. Along with the Halloween dance, along with the Drop Everything and Read sleepover, all electricity and other surprises aside, fingers crossed it will in fact take place. So we look forward to seeing our grade 3 through 5 that evening. And then next week we'll have our Halloween parade. Spirit Week, which the events we will share out, the student government has just decided upon. You'll see posters around the building, which will be nice to build up to our pep rally for all of our athletics, which will be next Friday. So that is all.
Terrific. Questions for Alex? Did the power outage make you think about backup generators?
It made all of us think about a lot of options, yes.
Okay. Okay. Questions? Good? All right. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Consent agenda. All right. We need a motion to accept the consent agenda as laid out here. Second?
Second.
All right. Be it resolved, the Board of Education of Garrison Union Free School District approves the consent agenda items B through E. Any questions about those items? Okay, vote to approve. All in favor say aye. Nay. And abstentions, and the ayes have it. Terrific. Consent agenda. Discussion items, committee updates. Who would like to go first? Planning committee?
So, planning committee met on October 16th, last week, and we decided, and we had kind of been searching through since the summer, that we did want to move forward with the coherence type of strategic plan, which many local districts have started to move forward with. And because we want the board, the community, the staff, the administration, all to be involved in this process, we decided that it would probably be best to start exploring a couple of the local consulting teams that have worked with the districts to see how best to start rolling out the implementation of a strategic planning process. So that is our next step that we recommend, getting in touch with at least the consultant who's worked nearby with housing and Croton, and others in other neighboring districts to try to see what they would recommend, how we start, and how best to proceed. Sound good?
Yeah, I think basically we need to have someone lay out the most effective process. Thank you. Any, you want to? Policy?
Sure. The policy committee met on October 16th, and we began our review of Section 3000, which addresses community relations. We will continue reviewing this section at our next meeting. We also discussed a request for a communications policy that was proposed by the teachers and staff in the building. And I really want to say we really appreciate their interest in strengthening communication within our school community, and we look forward to discussing this and working with them further. And I'm just excited when anyone's excited about policy. The committee also reviewed council's recommended changes to 7511 and 7660, which we will address later this evening on the agenda. We would also like to remind the community that all of the proposed policies and recently adopted policies are available to the public on board docs. So please take the time to read them thoroughly before sending questions and comments on them. And questions should be directed to the superintendent's attention if you have any on what you read on board docs, right?
Yep, very good.
Facilities? Not so much. We're good.
Yeah,
We're good.
quiet.
Pretty quiet.
Yes, because I don't think we have facilities. Did we? Yeah, we have to reschedule.
Well, I recommend we try to find time to move on, right? So there's some things to do. So
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great. Who else? What else do we have? Sorry, planning, audit. That's all done. Okay, we're in good shape. Any building committee stuff other than this reconsidering structures? and
Well, we
processes?
do have a technology committee meeting, which is more about the infrastructure, the infrastructural part of technology this Thursday at 3:30.
Why I have it before I forget it, only because my mind doesn't work very well anymore, is I think we had a task force that went about looking at best practices some years ago. I think Courtney, you served on
I
that.
was on 2013.
And a document was produced. It might be good for the
I have it
committee
somewhere.
conversations, because that committee did visit other schools and came up with
I
some.
have it on question.
It's a task force document. That might be helpful for your study teams in some way. Okay. That was just yeah. Flew across my screen there. Okay, great. I think that's it then. Board goals. Discussion of the board goals. Is there any discussion that anyone wants to take up? We brought this up last time, and it was offered by Mr. Gelber to table so that Matthew and Jocelyn could have some time to digest some of these board goals. What I want everyone to recognize is that board goals are distinct from district goals. Board goals are more a way of evaluating how we go about doing our own work as a team, as a group. It's not necessarily extension to the community or extension to the school. It's more about being a better organization. Any issues that you would like to discuss or language we want to focus on that we find problematic, or any flags?
I'll just note from the previous draft that goal 3 is now administrative collaboration, which I think is really strong wording, and I appreciate the change. Foster board administrative relations.
I think we could foster board and administrative relations. Might be good. Saying. All right, it's a goal. Anything else that we want to point out here? Nothing? All right, that's going to be an action item in a few secs here. Any other discussion? I'm just, thank you. I mean, this came out of retreat where we looked at each other and said, what can we do better this year? And so these goals are really kind of guidelines for us to figure out what we need to improve and how do we need to improve it. And I think we've already seen some of these appear. Streamlining agendas, that might be something I could focus on. Anyway.
The only thing I'd like to see is a agreement of a process of reflection and evaluation, and that we will look at the way we've done things, reflect on it, and decide if we think we did it well.
Well, I think,
Basically, I mean,
right.
this isn't a very good word, but doing a postmortem on things we do together, because sometimes in everything we do in business and
Sure.
family life, we rush through things and we get to the next thing, but we don't talk about the thing we just did and the efficacy of the process. So
I think that would be definitely listed as Goal 2, governance, Objective E, adopt a board board evaluation tool. But I think what I'm imagining here is that, well, we're going to do this with Haldane, right, in November, right? So we have this Saturday set aside where we're going to do this, we're going to adopt a board evaluation tool where we evaluate our performance. But I do think that board goals should be set really and evaluated in May, and then determined just after that for the following year. That we should be looking at ourselves in May and June, saying, what did we do, what didn't we do, how did we handle things, how could we improve A, B, or C, saying we didn't achieve that goal very well, let's keep it there, or that objective got mushed, maybe we need to revisit that. But I think that's really important. That an annual retreat where we evaluate what we've done through this tool, but also looking at our goals, and then a reformulation of those goals out of that kind of process. Is that what you're talking about? All right, terrific.
Just related to that, that meeting with Haldane is November 23rd. And is it a morning, afternoon, or evening?
It is
It's not determined?
9 to 1, I think.
9 to 1.
Yeah, I believe so.
Is that the tool that you envision, does that include ongoing monitoring of progress towards your goals? Because sometimes I feel like we set goals in schools and May seems too late. There are times when you can tweak something and adjust something to move towards the goal in a successful manner.
Well, I think none of these. Yeah, I think so. I don't know what the evaluation tool is going to present, right? I mean, we're getting training on a particular board evaluation tool. Is what we're doing.
A particular one, or is it just like an option? Is it the one NISBA?
It's the NISBA, yeah, board
Which I
evaluation.
think does allow you to add feedback throughout the year.
Yeah,
If
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken, so that you can constantly be keeping track of how you feel or doing on things, which I think is
Let us. Okay. Well, one thing we can do to that point is to actually do a midterm self-evaluation, like a quickie, where we say, all right. One of the things that happens with boards is you have a bunch of distractions come up, and then you forget about your long-term strategies, your annual goals. The important thing of committee work is to identify goals and objectives that and targets that you're trying to achieve. And I think maybe we need maybe sometime in January, Jill, it might be good to have that process. Like, how far along are we? Have we really not developed this at all? What are we doing here? Okay. So maybe we need a mid-year reflection point. Does that sound like a good idea? I'm just hoping it's in the minutes before it disappears. All right. All right. First reading of district policies, immunization of students, right? We all look at these, parent involvement for children with disabilities. Anything you want to talk about here?
The immunization one was sent back by council.
Yep.
So the laws are continuing to change, and they have updated our recently adopted one. And
Okay.
sent us back another one for another first reading.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
And it's just the first change that they made is they struck student and put in every child entering or attending a school. And then the rest of the language for the whole policy uses the word student. And I'm worried about making every child and then us being responsible for ensuring every child who walks into an extracurricular event.
We are required.
And so then maybe should the rest of the language reflect child instead of student? So that it's
For
consistent.
consistency, I can go back and make that change.
That's
I
fine.
think I changed to student for this round, and then council changed it back.
Switching back and forth.
Yeah.
Use both.
We really don't want that.
We don't want the discrepancy.
No, because then we just have to be in accordance, a child and a student. So if you have a child, let's say a child that is not immunized and is a younger sibling of a student, that might fall into our catchment.
Minus the mental health. It's a child as a preferred word.
Well, it's whatever's consistent with the law on that, but
If the lawyer changed it, we can reach out to
That's why,
council
yeah.
and ask why.
yeah, and also, look, okay,
And I'm not a lawyer.
good catch. catch. It's really important to
Yeah, but
catch
like
these
every
things because, you know,
word
somebody's sometimes going to look at this document, you know, 5 years from now, like, how come they made this change, or, you know, why is this language so weird?
That's what we're doing right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, exactly.
Going, okay, what, they did this in 2003,
Right.
why?
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, our counsel's wonderful, but one pair of eyes, right? We need multiple eyes.
This is exactly why we have 2 readings on these.
Exactly. Okay, good catch. Parent involvement for children with disabilities? I see that.
Questions, comments, concerns?
This is,
A lot of this goes through what she was talking about earlier, in terms of how
Mhm.
parents are contacted. I have a question on this. Do the parents know about this policy if they are in part of the IEP process? Like, if you get brought into this process, are you shown our school policy so that, is that maybe something we're gonna offer, or is it, I don't know if it would be useful. Yeah.
I think they're, I think
Like,
my,
their packet?
Just so they understand what our overarching guidelines as required by law are.
I think there's so much educators assume that, you know, in the conversation, sometimes parents need to have things broken down in very specific ways and saying, hey, this is the process. This is what's out there. These are the options. This is the gradation. This is what a 504. This is what an IEP. You know, sort of in a very basic level, just because we often assume that a parent will know the difference between special ed and 504 and RTI and who's in charge of delivering what and who's responsible for delivering what. And we can do these presentations, which are very, very important to inform the board. Parents aren't necessarily going to get this, and then I think often people respond to basically a need-to-know situation. If I don't have a child with special education, with special ed needs, I don't need to know this, and then when they get in a situation where they do need to know it, they start to focus, right? So they're not going to read a handbook with this section because they don't think it pertains to them until it does. So, and that's when, you know, we lose the thread of the conversation. So I don't know if there's an orienting process that we can sort of embolden here and maybe underscore. I don't
Well,
know.
there's a packet that goes from the team
Sure.
to parents, and this policy should be one of those items in the packet.
Thinking at the
Or
Point
just
of-
a reference.
Could there be like a very brief overview at the September curriculum night for new parents? Just like a 5-minute basic terms?
Yeah,
Sort of
things you need to know
Things
in
you
the
need to know
world.
about being a parent of a student, in terms you may never have heard before.
I mean, one thing we could do, there's a website called understood.org, and it's for parents of children with learning differences. And it really provides a lot of very clear information about what is this? What is
What is
this?
that?
What do you do if you suspect X? And could that perhaps be on the special ed page of the website?
As
The
long as
school
it's
website.
consistent with law, or I'm sorry, and New York regs. I mean, it's when you start drifting from a kind of a parental advocacy kind of website, which is a catch-all, which may not apply. I mean, I don't want to give people false information, but as long as that information is consistent with, you know.
It's consistent with the federal IDEA law.
Sure.
And then it has, but it's not a New York State website.
Sure.
It's a nonprofit.
Right.
To educate
That's good.
parents.
That's
I don't know.
I think it's an important resource. I think it's an important resource. I think what you're asking for is like, this is this, here's some procedures, something soft. It might be a really good way to, you know, another, as a back to school night or new parent orientation or even the K welcoming sessions, you know, to sort of lay some of this stuff out. Not in a full on all the details, just say, this is what's up.
One more question just in relation to the presentation we just saw. Under procedural safeguards notices, this is the last section of this. We're adding, the district will provide notice upon to the parents of a student with disability at least one time per year. and also upon, and we're adding independent education evaluation. I'm a little curious now based on your presentation how that is defined. Can we ask what that independent education evaluation would mean? Is that like if a parent goes out and gets their independent evaluation? Is it a teacher considered independent? I just don't know. Yeah, I just don't.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
First you should say and independent education. And. It's important that and is serious. It's a serious and.
But it's a separate.
Yeah, but it says and then line break F, item F, right? That's a little confusing.
I see.
That's a bit of an issue. It might just have been an automatic situation, but you know, where the Word doc or whatever it does that thing.
Yeah.
Right. Be careful with bullet points because it creates a different category. Because what you're saying there has to meet both criteria or something.
But I don't think that is
Or
actually.
A through F.
I think it's one of the, any one of these criteria can call up is my reading of it. I think your and is correct in that place.
Yeah, look out for those ors and ands. Who thought we'd be talking about conjunctions and disjunctions? But here we are. All right, let's do it. I need a motion to adopt the board goals. Matthew, you want to make a... Yeah,
motion.
there you go. Wow. I move to adopt.
Move.
Yeah, there you go. And a second?
Second.
All right, be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District, hold your breath, adopts the board goals as presented. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Abstentions? We put David as an abstention. I guess he has to abstain to abstain. So then it passes, right? There we go. Nina, oh, this one's a biggie.
Do you have to read this?
Okay, thank you.
Long.
Thank you, Lord. Okay, yeah, right. So, I need a motion to adopt a bond resolution. A second? Okay. Be it resolved that the Board of Education adopts the bond resolution as presented in the agenda as action item 10B. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Can we have a show of hands, please, for ayes? This is legal. Okay, thank you. 6 ayes. No nays. No abstentions, I guess. Accepted the district corrective action plan. I need a motion to accept the district action plan.
So moved.
Second. Be it resolved, the Board of Education Garrison Union Free School District accepts the district corrective action plans in response to the auditor's fiscal report for the year ending June 30th, 2019. Just so that you know, as part of the auditing process, our auditors come in and they provide a corrective plan. This was super brief.
It's a testament to Sue's good work.
Yeah, Sue is, who's not here today, did a lot of strong work on keeping everything the way it ought to be. Our auditors found virtually zero.
Very well.
Almost had to make it up. Something.
Yeah, I feel like there are most things she's already working on.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I have to do it. Yeah, it's in the mail. Yeah. All right. So it was like that. So we just have to accept it, though. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nays? And the ayes have it. Motion to approve the updated district-wide school safety plan. Second.
Second.
As you may know, that we had a 15-minute public hearing with the district-wide school safety plan, in which the public had a moment to come and comment. There was no comment during that moment, but so it's just to say that we aligned ourselves with the law on this in the matter of the district-wide school safety plan. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District approves the updated district-wide school safety plan for 2019-2020. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Abstentions? And the ayes have it. Okay. Public comment. Thank you, public. Board member comment?
excited to be here.
Ah, there we are.
Yay.
Anyone want to welcome Matthew?
Welcome.
There we go. We're so happy to you complete us. I appreciate it. I think it's you'll find this to be a very challenging and interesting process. You'll need to be patient. You'll need to be observant and hardworking, and you'll need to be self-aware. And it's a very beneficial process. It's not always rewarding, in the sense that very few people come up and say thank you for serving, but the board tries to say thank you for serving. Okay. Okay. And I think that's all she wrote, right? You need a motion to go to executive session to discuss the employment history of a particular individual.
So moved.
Second? All in favor say aye. And when we return, we will reconvene, we will adjourn, but there will be no public business when we return. Is that a fair statement? Thank you so much. I want to recognize Coulter Young and his wonderful paintings down at my office at the Cold Spring Coffee House. Appreciate that. You've helped me out with the aura and the atmosphere of the place. It was kind of dead before your art appeared, you know. Although it is a place, quite frankly, where you can put on a few pounds because of their pastries. Those croissants are too good. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the art. It's great to see you. Anything you want to announce?
No.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.